Thank you to the organizers for the invitation, to Jan, to Rashid, Eki, the people who took part in organizing, and welcome everyone. You can click on. Okay, so I want to run through a number of things and make a couple of key points, some of the points that Amos has made, and a number of other points. Okay, thank you. So first of all, Amos went through some of the examples, and the document, as Amos described, is made up of the definition itself, which is in front of you here, and 11 examples. The one thing to say about the definition that Amos has said is that it's not a definition at all. It's, as you can see, it's very confusing. It includes phrases like a certain perception of Jews, but it doesn't tell us what perception. It says that it may be expressed as hatred toward Jews, but maybe not. Why only hatred? We know that there's actually other emotions that are much more dominant, actually, in relation to anti-Semitism and other forms of racism. Fear, for instance, disgust, other emotions. It goes into this issue of Jews and non-Jews here, which is very confusing. So it doesn't function as a definition. The important thing to say about this, right, there's very little discourse actually on the definition itself, is that the confusion is part of the program, part of the aim of the IHRA document, right, to create confusion that allows its application in this kind of broad and ever-expanding way that Amos described. Then we have if you can click on the examples 1 to 5, and the next slide, please, 6 to 11. In 7 of the definitions of the 11, right, actually deal with Israel and not with Jews. Now, this is where the conflation of Jews and Israel happens, right? It's important to say the IHRA definition has nothing to do with the struggle against anti-Semitism, okay? Nothing to do with the struggle against anti-Semitism. It doesn't protect Jews. Its aim is to conflate two very different things, a people and a state, right? Jews, a people, and Israel, a state, two different things, in order to protect a state, Israel, from criticism, very justified, very urgent criticism of its policies and violence against the people, right, Palestinians. So it turns reality on its head. Whereas the historical struggle against anti-Semitism was about protecting the people, primarily actually from violent states, the IHRA definition protects a state in order to allow it to continue to perpetrate violence against the people, right? Now, if you can, this conflation of Israel and Jews is, of course, completely self-contradictory. There's so many self-contradictories within the IHRA document because it disguises itself as something that protects Jews, but it doesn't protect Jews at all. It actually puts Jews in danger. We'll get to that in a second. But very specifically, the document does exactly what its own example, number 6, posits as anti-Semitic. That is, the anti-Semitic charge that Jews are disloyal to their own states because they are more loyal, first and foremost, to Israel. Right? So the conflation of Jews and Israel makes it seem like somehow all Jews around the world, right, are somehow connected to Israel. And this is actually an Israeli claim from the beginning of the Israeli state, to say we claim the identity of all Jews around the world, whatever they think and feel, right? But this conflation, which is embodied in the IHRA definition, is actually itself anti-Semitic, right? It speaks to this anti-Semitic issue charge of disloyalty, inherent disloyalty of Jews. The other thing that it does, of course, is it denies Palestinians the civil right to narrate their own history, their lived experiences, their culture, their politics, which effectively legalizes, and Amos talks about how this allegedly non-legally binding definition is very, very legally binding in effect. So this effectively legalizes anti-Palestinian racism, and we'll get to that in a second. And finally, if you can just go back to the previous slide, it coercively imposes political orthodoxy in speech, research, and lawful collective action by conflating anti-Semitism with criticism of Zionism in Israel, which also targets, and this is a very important point, Jews who express criticism of Israeli policies and violence against Palestinians, especially but not only actually anti-Zionist, right? So it's important to say the IHRA definition, by targeting Jews, right, it targets Jews. It doesn't protect Jews. How can a definition, right, that allegedly is supposed to protect Jews puts, as we'll show in a minute, and Amos has brought some examples, but there are many, many others, actually puts Jews in danger, targets Jews, both in the legal sphere, physically, in various ways. So let's start with anti-Palestinian racism. And it's important to say the IHRA definition is a mechanism of anti-Palestinian racism. That's what the IHRA definition is primarily. Now, anti-Palestinian racism as a response to really an alarming rise in primarily North America, but really around the world, in racism against Palestinians, the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association in 2022 proposed a framework for anti-Palestinian racism that defines it as a form of racism that silences, excludes, erases, stereotypes, defames, or dehumanizes Palestinians or their narratives, right? The next slide. This is some of the elements of anti-Palestinian racism, and I want to just mention two of them, the first and the last. The first is denying the Nakba, the 1948 Nakba, but also the ongoing Nakba until today, including the Gaza genocide, and justifying violence against Palestinians. That's obviously anti-Palestinian racism. Now, it's important to say, today we have a library of research by Palestinians, but also by Israeli Jews and by many others, about the Nakba and about the ongoing Nakba. There's a library of research, right? Now, according to the IHRA definition, right, discussing the Nakba is anti-Semitism, right? The IHRA definition here basically tells us to deny very well documented reality, right? It tells us that if we go outside in the middle of the day, and we all can see that it's the middle of the day, the IHRA definition will tell us that it's the middle of the night. And if you say that it's the middle of the day, you're an anti-Semite, right? That's the level of absurdity of the IHRA definition. And by doing this, the previous slide just, yes? The last point of the anti-Palestinian racism framework, defaming Palestinians and their allies with slander such as being inherently anti-Semitic, a terrorist threat, sympathizer, or opposed to democratic values, right? So every time the Palestinians narrate their own experiences, the Nakba and the ongoing Nakba, right, they're tagged as anti-Semitic. That's the kind of slander that we should call it by name. It's anti-Palestinian racism. It has nothing whatsoever to do with anti-Semitism, right? All of this actually hinders. It's an obstacle in the real struggle against anti-Semitism. And as Amos said, anti-Semitism is a very real issue today, right? The IHRA definition is an obstacle in the struggle. What it is primarily is a mechanism of anti-Palestinian racism. Next slide, please. So, anti-Palestinian racism. The other piece that I want to mention is how the IHRA definition participates in this discourse about bad Jews and good Jews, right? So I've already mentioned this kind of the way in which the IHRA definition turns reality on its head, right? Instead of protecting a people, it protects a state. This is the first point here. But in this process, as I mentioned, it also targets Jews, anti-Zionists and other Jews, right, who criticize Israel. In order to rationalize the situation, right, where a definition that allegedly is there to protect Jews, right, but it targets Jews, we enter the realm of states, and primarily non-Jews in these states, actually, right, who divide Jews between good Jews, who are Zionists, who support Israel, who will stand with Israel, whatever it does, including genocide, right, and bad Jews, good Jews and bad Jews. Now, it's very important to say, no state, and certainly no European state, right, has the right to tell Jews how to identify as Jews, right? And this, of course, applies in equal measure to all groups. States have no space, no place to tell people how to identify, right, themselves, their own identities. And this, of course, applies to Jews. But this is what the IHRA definition does, right? It tells Jews how to be good Jews. And if you're not a good Jew, if you're a bad Jew, then we enter also this discourse of actually you're not really a Jew anymore, right? So this is a very, very dangerous situation which puts Jews in very real danger, right? It's an absurdity, this definition that, again, tells us constantly that it's a consensus to protect Jews, does not protect Jews at all. It puts them in harm's way. The next slide, please. A very important example, Yair Golan, which is the former deputy chief of staff of the Israeli army, in May 2025, this is not a peacenik, right? This is not a left-wing, peacenik. This is a senior Israeli military authority, said the following things. He said, a sane country does not wage war against civilians, does not kill babies as a pastime, and does not engage in mass population displacement. Right? This is on an Israeli radio show in May 2025. He also went on to comparing Israel, as Amos mentioned, to apartheid South Africa, and noted that, quote, the Jewish people who have endured persecution, pogroms, and genocide throughout our history are the ones now taking actions that are utterly unconscionable. Right? Yair Golan, former deputy chief of staff of the Israeli army. The response to that by, of course, Israeli government ministers, by Israeli politicians, by supporters of Israel around the world, is that Yair Golan is spreading blood libel because of the reference to Israel killing Palestinian children, which is, again, a documented reality. Israel has killed now well over 20,000 Palestinian children in its genocide in Gaza. Right? This is a documented reality. There's no debate about this number. Right? For Israel, if you talk about this documented reality, this middle of the day, right, blood libel, right, anti-Semite. Now, it's important to say, almost half of American Jews today, millions of Jews, not one or two, millions of Jews think that Israel is perpetrating genocide in Gaza. Almost half of American Jews. There is a discourse in the U.S. and outside the U.S. that this is a blood libel. So here we are. The IHRA definition is now labeling millions of Jews, right, as people who spread anti-Semitic blood libels. There is no end to this absurdity, this grotesque absurdity. Next slide, please. Yes. So just a few other examples about targeting bad Jews from the United States, and I'll only refer here, you can see three of the examples, but I'll only refer to the really scandalous firing of tenured Jewish-American anthropologist Mara Finkelstein from Molenberg College in 2024. This is a Jewish academic. What she did, by the way, was repost an Instagram post. This was her big sin, right? She's a very critical academic against Israeli violence against Palestinians, very well known. But in this case, what got her fired, and this is a tenured academic, right, was reposting an Instagram post, right? I also just mentioned the dismantling of Sukkot, which is a temporary outdoor Jewish religious structure to celebrate the holiday of Sukkot, in universities here at Northwestern University, University of California, Los Angeles, that in October 2024 dismantled Jewish religious structures, right, set up by Jewish Voice for Peace, left-wing anti-Zionist Jewish organization in the United States, because they express solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza, right? What is dismantling Jewish religious structures? That's right, it's anti-Semitism. But here, it was in the name of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, of this kind of struggle against anti-Semitism, which of course has nothing to do, again, with protecting Jews. Now, these are all examples of targeting Jews for the way they express their Jewish identity. Again, that is targeting of Jews as Jews, which is really the most basic way of thinking about anti-Semitism, which, remember the definition itself of IHRA, is not in the definition. Targeting Jews as Jews. Where you'll find it is in the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, which, the next slide please, the most basic definition of anti-Semitism in the JDA is anti-Semitism, discrimination, prejudice, hostility, or violence against Jews as Jews, or Jewish institutions as Jewish. That's a definition. right? Next slide, please. All right. Nearing my end, 2 more points. One, I myself been involved for a long time, the last 2.5 years, in the struggle against the IHRA definition in New Jersey. I live in Philadelphia in the United States, but I teach in a small university in New Jersey, and I'm part of a group of Jews, Palestinians, Muslims, others, right, who are engaged in the last 2.5 years in a quite successful struggle so far. We've managed to prevent the IHRA definition from being integrated into law in the state of New Jersey. I won't go into the details of the document that we've created in the process of the struggle, but we've created this document, the New Jersey Statement of Antisemitism and Islamophobia. And what I want to mention in this, in relation to the New Jersey Statement to our group in New Jersey, are 2 things. One, there is no such thing as the Jews, right? There are different Jews, different Jewish groups, different Jewish organizations, right? Because one of the things that we got a lot in New Jersey is this idea, well, the Jewish Federation in New Jersey told us that they support the IHRA definition. We came, our group, that includes a lot of Jews, right? And we said, well, there are many different kind of Jewish positions, and the state, again, has no role in telling Jews how to be Jews, right? And telling Jews how to be good Jews or bad Jews, right? But another thing that we did with our statement, and again, I won't go into this, we can go into the Q&A if you'd like, right? Of course, we put anti-Semitism and Islamophobia together and referred specifically to IHRA as a mechanism of anti-Palestinian racism, right? But one of the things that we said, and in the opening paragraph to the document, is that this document offers a new approach to the struggle against the considerable increase in manifestations of racism in the last few years, by focusing on connections between various forms of racism aimed at different groups. Recent attempts at advancing definitions focused on anti-Semitism or Islamophobia separately marginalize connections and entanglements that have stood at the center of current research on these phenomena. We know that they're not separate. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Palestinian race, this is all, what we're talking about is racism. The IHRA definition wants to separate this, right? Due to their narrow focus, such definitions have been weaponized to silence and intimidate other groups in various ways, as with the IHRA definition. This then, and this is the key point, this then divides groups that often face related attacks, hampering cooperation and solidarity that are crucial in the struggle against racism in all its forms. Indeed, racism functions also to put racialized groups against one another. The perpetration of this logic creates the conditions to exacerbate both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So one of the things that we said is that the struggle against racism, including anti-Semitism, which is indeed, as you said, Amos, very urgent, right, requires dialogue between groups, between racialized groups, between persecuted groups, requires cooperation and collaboration. And the IHRA definition is aimed to do exactly the opposite. Right? Because again, it's primarily a mechanism of anti-Palestinian racism, and it's primarily a mechanism to target Jews who don't fall into how Jews should be according to this Israel image of who Jews are. Okay, one last point, last slide, if you can go to the last slide, is about Holocaust memory, international law, and the struggle against anti-Semitism. Now, we have today charges of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes against Israel and Israeli leaders at the International Court of Justice, the highest UN court, and the International Criminal Court, both of them, of course, not too far away from here in The Hague. These courts and the international legal system, international law after World War II as a whole, are a Holocaust legacy. We, scholars in Holocaust and genocide studies, sometimes call this in our classrooms a Holocaust lesson, right? International law. If these charges, as we heard at the beginning, against Israel and the discussion of them are delegitimized as anti-Semitism, right, through the IHRA definition or otherwise, it spells the end, and this is very important, it spells the end of Holocaust memory in education, and therefore undermines the struggle against anti-Semitism. There is no struggle against anti-Semitism without international law. There is no struggle against anti-Semitism in a lawless world. That's, by the way, the vision of Israel, a lawless world. Now, this also undermines the interests of European states as they face ongoing aggressive and unlawful Russian invasion of Ukraine in the last few years. for undermining, again, as we heard at the beginning, the ICJ and the ICC on Palestine, Israel undermines the ICC and the ICJ in its entirety. Would anyone suggest that the charges of war crimes against Putin and his Orwellian Commissioner for Children's Rights, Orwellian because, of course, she oversees a system of targeting Ukrainian children, would anyone think that the charges of war crimes in the ICC against them represent anti-Russian racism? Of course not. It would be an absurdity. It's an absurdity in the IHRA definition case as well. Israel and its supporters constantly remind us that we should not single out Israel. On this, actually, to conclude, we agree. Criticizing the policies and violence of the Israeli state against Palestinians, Lebanese, and others has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And bringing charges against Israel in the international legal system is just like bringing charges against any other state. One more slide. The IHRA definition, to conclude, figures in the vision of the Israeli government and the Russian government of Netanyahu and Putin of a lawless world. That's what they want. This is the agenda that the IHRA definition is part, a lawless world. A vision that is exactly the opposite of the struggle against anti-Semitism, and it's also exactly the opposite of the core values of the European Union and its important institutions. We should stand against this in all ways, all the time, everywhere. Thank you.